Hey everybody, it's me again, Chuck Dixon, back once again to answer your questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Now, if you have a question for me, you can directly ask it at Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com. That's where you can reach me. I look at this, you know, I look at these every day, and it's the most direct way. There's other venues you can ask, but this one is the most reliable. It gives me a permanent one-stop shopping source for all of your questions, suggestions, and comments. Okay, Glenn Davis asks, the Airboy series was based in Sacramento, California for a time. Did you ever go to the city? Why did you choose Sac? How important is the city, whether New York metropolis or Gotham City, to the character? No, I never visited Sacramento, California. I hear it's a lovely place. Uh, so, um, well, the reasons are, multitude as to why my Airboy series was set in California. And it kind of goes back to his golden age origins. Um, Airboy is one of those comic book properties that at its heart is completely ludicrous, which is really its charm. Um, so in his original iteration as published by Hillman, Airboy was created by Charles Biro, uh, extremely prolific comic creator in the Golden Age. And David Nelson, is an orphan living in a monastery. And, and he and one of the monks build Birdie, the fabulous plane that Airboy would fly, the bat-winged plane. That unlike Batman's bat plane, these wings actually work. Birdie flies by flapping its wings. Now, like I said, this is completely ludicrous, but what a cool idea. And of course, tremendous imagery. Um, Now, naturally, I think all readers assume that this story took place in California because where else in the continental United States are there monasteries or missions? So I suppose New Mexico and Arizona, you could say there were ones, but Birdie is shown specifically flying over the ocean. So I mean, when I read the old Golden Age stories, I assumed it was California as well and seemed like a natural place. And especially in our series, since we were going to have David Nelson inherit an aviation aeronautics empire, a la Boeing or Lockheed, um, it seemed a natural fit to set the series in California as well, because so many aviation companies are based west of the Rockies, and you got to set a story somewhere. Not a lot of comic book heroes are based out of California, so it seemed like a natural fit. And of course, one of the biggest considerations was the fact that Kat and Dean, who were the publishers of Eclipse Comics, they lived in California. You know, they lived in basically the same region that we set Airboy. And Kat would often send me photo reference or make suggestions as to what David Nelson's life would be like in that region. So there you go. There were a lot of reasons to set it in California, and they were all good ones. Just Airboy and California go together like peanut butter and jelly. Okay. Doug Stafford asks, when you introduced Bane, was there any blowback because his strength was drug induced? Um, no, there really wasn't. And I think the main reason for that is because Bane is a villain. So a lot of villains are drug induced or drug enhanced. A lot of villains are science gone wrong. So yeah, there was. I never heard anything about it. Now, if you did a hero whose powers were drug induced, yeah, you might have a problem there. So, but no, we never heard anything about it. long story short. Okay, Robert Hinman asks, you told us how you stopped writing Conan. How did you get into writing Savage Sword of Conan? Was it an assignment or what? Um, well, it all begins with Larry Hama. Larry Hama is a guy that I always, still to this day admire. He's a comic book renaissance man. I followed his career as a fan. If I saw Larry Hama's name on something, I had to have it. And because he just seemed like a guy that I could relate to. His work was always grounded in reality. He wrote and drew with an authority, and that's what I mean. Larry could do it all. He could write, he could draw, he could letter, he could ink, he could color. Larry was probably good at stapling comics together. He just knew how to do all the jobs really, really well. And I responded to that in a big way. And I always enjoyed his work. There was something about his stuff that I always liked. And somewhere in 1986, I was on the phone with Hilary Barta, cartoonist extraordinaire, and Hilary, we were just, goofing off about comics and nerdy stuff, and business stuff. And at the time, I was working as a security guard at an insurance company. But Hilary said, "Hey, Larry Hama's bringing back Savage Tales." Savage Tales was originally a comic featuring Conan and Kazar, and it was canceled as Savage Sword of Conan grew in sales. But Larry was going to bring Savage Tales back as like this men's sweat magazine, in comics form. It was like the old 50s for men only, except this was going to be a comic book version of that. And it was going to be all war and Western stories. It was strictly an anthology book. And Hillary's telling me about this, and because he knew I really appreciate hearing about it. He knew it was my kind of stuff. This was my wheelhouse, war, Western, adventure stories. And, to me, this looked like, the second coming of Two-Fisted Tales, and I really wanted to be on it. And I told Hillary, yeah, I'm gonna contact Larry Hama. I want to be on this book. And Hillary said, okay, hold on. Before you call Larry, I gotta tell you, I gotta warn you about Larry. I'm like, well, warn me. And he goes, yeah, he can be a bit of a bastard. Yeah, this smiling man. He said he can be a bit of a bastard. Now, he said bastard as opposed to a-hole, because Larry's not an a-hole. But Larry could be a bastard. He could play act as a bastard, I should say, because he's a very nice man. He's a little prickly, but he's a nice guy. He's got a good heart. But Hillary said he's going to give you a hard time at first. It's not going to go down easy, but he's always going to tell you what's on his mind, which I liked. So I thought, okay, forewarned is forearmed. So I ginned up my courage and, got all aggressive, which I'm usually not. I thought, okay, I'm just going to go at this guy because I really want to be on this book. So I called Larry, just cold call him at Marvel, introduce myself, and I'm a nobody. I got, I've had a couple of comic book credits and that was it. And he doesn't know me from Adam. And I said, I heard about this Savage Sword or Savage Tales book, and I really love to be a part of this. And Larry says, yeah, okay, well, what, tell me why. Why should I hire you? And I said, Larry, you need me. Okay, well, this throws him a bit. There's a pause on the phone. Then he comes back and he goes, why the hell would I need you? I never heard of you. And I said, okay, you need me because most comic book writers don't know which end of a gun the bullets come out of. And there's another long pause. And Larry says, well, you're right about that. I said, well, Larry, I'll do the homework. I said, I'm familiar with, I'm familiar with war and Western stories. They're my favorite kind of stories, my favorite kind of comics, and I will do you proud. I will, um, go at this earnestly. So Larry says, well, okay, send me some of your ideas and I'll see if I need you. and then click. There's no goodbye. The phone call ends. So I sent him in about a dozen pitches, just like 2-paragraph descriptions of 8-page stories for 8-page stories. And he bought about half of them. And over time, bought most of the rest. So I went to work for Larry Hama on Savage Tales. And man, it was a cool run. I wish the book had lasted longer. I think if they had solicited it correctly, it would have lasted, a few years. As it is, there were only 8 issues. And some of the most fun I've ever had in comics, and it was at the very beginning of my career. I mean, I got to work with John Severin and John Buscema and Ken Stacy and Ron Wagner, and it was simply a blast to work on. Well, the thing is, I here's here's the thing about Larry. He would give every new freelancer coming to him with a portfolio or with pitches, give them all a really, really hard time. And this was basically to test them. Okay, so he's just going to burn you to the ground, and then you have to come back. And if you don't come back, he's got no use for you because he figures, hey, if you can't handle a little pressure from me, then you can't handle deadlines, criticism, all the rest of it. Okay, you're not going to be there for me because you're a wimp. And the list of really, really super talented people that Larry just excoriated is legion. But only the ones who came back ever got to work with Larry. And my burning desire to be on that book is the only thing that got me on there. Because I'm like, okay, he's giving me a hard time on the phone, but I'm going to see through it. I'm going to prove to this guy that I belong on this book. And I did. I handed work in. I mean, he began to assign me stories. I mean, he wanted a story about the Warsaw Ghetto in World War II, about the Jews debating whether or not to arm themselves against the Nazis. And I had the script to him in 3 days. He wanted another story about the failed Mongol invasion of the Japanese islands and how it was destroyed by the kamikaze, the divine wind, the storm that sank the Mongol fleet. And I had it to him within days. I mean, this was all cool stuff. This was like, yeah, I want to write about that. So I proved myself to him. I proved I was reliable, and like I had promised him, I would do the homework. My stories needed very little correcting. And, he saw in me what I saw in him, kind of a kindred soul. We liked a lot of the same kind of stuff. And we also were concerned with producing quality comics on time. And, we both loved the medium. And so once I proved my reliability, he wanted to give me more work. So he offered me the King Kull backups that were in every issue of Savage Sword of Conan. These were 8-page stories, and they were standalones. They didn't continue because Savage Sword of Conan was all about standalone comic. He had a 50-page lead feature starring Conan. It was basically a mini graphic novel. And then you had this 8-page backup. And they both had to be, the readers of Savage Sword of Conan weren't going to buy every issue. They were casual readers. So you wanted to make sure you didn't cheat them. You gave them complete stories in each issue. So, I wrote dozens of these 8-pagers. And I wrote so many in such a rapid amount of time that Larry said, look, stop writing, stop sending these in. We've got more than enough. We've got like a year and a half of Conan or King Kull backups. Well, that's when I began saying, well, why don't you give me a shot at the lead feature? Why don't you let me do some Savage Sword of Conan? And he's like, no, I got writers for that. I got writers for Savage Sword. I don't, I got people. I don't need anybody. And I didn't say, hey, Larry, I can do a better job than them, because you never tell an editor I can do a better job than the person you picked. Because number one, they picked them. So they must have thought they were good. So you're criticizing not only their writer that they picked, but you're criticizing them for choosing them. And then the other thing, you never know if the guy writing it is the editor's brother-in-law or cousin, you know. So you don't ever want to say, I can do better than that guy. But I would just say, look, I just really, and I really did. I want to write some Conan. I like Conan, you know, as much as I like Cull. I think I've proven myself. But Larry just goes, oh, what are you trying to take another guy's job away? I'm like, well, yeah. so so I ignored Larry and just kept pitching. I kept sending him pitches for Savage Sword over and over and over again. He would get these pitches and he would call and yell at me, stop sending me these pitches. Stop, I'm not gonna buy them. I don't want them. I got writers. Okay. Well, eventually Larry invited me up to Marvel for lunch, which was the first time he'd ever done that. In fact, in a prior phone conversation, I thought, hey, this is the tradition when you work with your editor. You go up to New York and meet them and go out to lunch. This is what you do. And in a previous, a prior phone conversation, I said, Larry, do you want me to come up to Marvel? We'll go out to lunch. He goes, why would I go out to lunch with you? I don't know you. This is after we've been working together. So Larry suggests, come up for lunch. Like, oh, wow, cool. So I go up, it's a Wednesday, it was always a Wednesday. So I go up on a Wednesday and his assistant or associate editor, Pat Redding, lets me into the office and Larry's not there yet. And I'm sitting on this saggy old sofa that Larry had in his office. And I'm sitting there waiting for him to come in. So he comes in, steps through the door, never seen me before in his life. And he says, who are you? I said, Chuck Dixon, we're having lunch today. And Larry goes, oh. Just like, oh, I forgot. And now I'm sorry I invited you up here. He didn't say that, but it was all in his gesture. So he sits down at his desk. And I'm sitting on the sofa and I can see him at his desk. And he has a briefcase. And he opens the briefcase. And inside the briefcase are only two items. One is a VHS tape of the Three Stooges, and the other is a Colt 45 automatic. And Larry looks over at me to see what my reaction is going to be to what's in his briefcase. And I said, is that a government model? And he said, yeah, it is. And there was this little, connection there. Because, I wasn't shooken up by seeing a gun. I grew up around guns all my life. So anyway, he says, well, look, I got to do a little business and then we'll go out to lunch. Can you just hang around? And I said, yeah. So I just sort of wandered the halls, looking at what they were doing in the bullpen and everything else, and then wandered back closer to noon. And Larry said, okay, we're going to go. And he and Pat Redding and I go to this terrific Southwestern restaurant that was around the corner from Marvel. And we sit down and we're just having lunch. We're just, Larry's talking. And when Larry talks, I listen because he's always interesting. So he does most of the talking and I'm just listening and Pat's just listening. And, we talk about this and talk about that. And then at the very end of the lunch, he talks about Conan. And he asked me a few questions and all this. And he says, Pat, write this down. Chuck's going to write 3 issues of Savage Sword a year. And then we're a little deeper into the conversation. And he says, Pat, why don't you put that? He's going to write 6 issues a year. And I was like, okay. She writes it down. And we're getting toward the end. The busboys are clearing the table. And Larry turns to me and says, describe to me the most important element in Conan in one word. What's the one word that makes Conan different than every other character in fiction? And I said, cruelty. And he turns to Pat and he says, Pat, Chuck's our new regular Savage Sword of Conan writer. He's going to write all 12 issues every year. And I'm like, whoa, I have arrived. I have a full-time job in comics. I was able to go home and set a wedding date with my fiance and because this was going to be a regular paycheck. And what I didn't know was it paid royalties. I mean, I knew it paid royalties, but I didn't know how much, because Savage Sword of Conan did very well in the newsstand. So that's how I got the job. I it's one of the few times, you know, Conan and the Punisher are the only two characters I ever campaigned to write, and and the campaign paid off. What can I say? I was on Savage Sword for a number of years, working with my good buddy Gary Quapis and Ernie Chan and guys like that, and it was a hell of a run, and it, you know, firmly established me in comics. And Larry, you know, turned out to be a very a friend and mentor, and really got me started in a big way. So, next question. Barry Branscombe, how many projects are you working on in any given month? And related, how do you manage your time while working on more than one story at a time? Finally, have you ever found it difficult to juggle more than one storyline at a time? Well, let's look at what I'm doing right now. Let's look at this month in the life of me. I'm doing a lot of work for ArcTunes, which is the new digital platform from Archaven. Uh, and they're usually done in, it's the equivalent of like 5 or 6 comic book pages form each episode. And they're, frankly, they're quite easy to write. They're easier to write than comics, because I don't think I have to think about page turn panels. I simply have to think of one final panel in each story that is a cliffhanger, or leads you to the next events, or leaves you with something to wonder about, or a surprise, or whatever. Uh, but yeah, so I have to write a few episodes of that a month, and it's not quite the equivalent of a monthly comic each month. So I'm able to do a number of them. One of them is Something Big that I'm working on with Frank Fosco. Another one is Silencio, the Silent Academy, which I'm writing with, kind of being backstopped by Vox. This was his idea. It's about an assassin school set in an alternate universe that's somewhat like the Renaissance era. And, you know, it was Vox's idea, but I've been writing the scripts, and then he sort of like backs me up, makes changes to make it closer to what his original idea was. But primarily, I'm the one writing it. Again, these are all on ArcTunes, which, by the way, is free if you want to check these out. I'm also writing Go Monster Go. It's a 1960s retro, like hot rods and horror movie drive-in kind of thing. Ghost in the Invisible Bikini is the closest I can think of as a movie that relates to what we're doing here, and that's me and Tim Lottie on the art, and it's a departure for me. It's very much a pastiche. Another one I'm working on with Vox is Midnight's War. It's set in an alternate universe where basically vampires run things. Vampires are at the core of civilization. Humans are second-class citizens, and until a bunch of vampire killers arrive to upset the status quo. And this one is very much written by Vox and I write some episodes, Vox writes some episodes, and then we figure out a way that they all link together. He's following like the uber big story. I'm following the side story of a human detective working for a vampire-run police department. And so we're very much, you know, writing that one together. It's a co-writing deal. I'm also currently writing I guess it'll be a 6-issue miniseries of King Ace from my Avalon series. And King Ace returns to Avalon and basically forms a neighborhood watch once because the city's in crisis. Also this month, I completed the last of the next set of 4 Medal of Honor comics. Medal of Honor comics are 8-page comic stories that are free. If you go to the Association of the United States Army, you can read these comics for free. And each 8-page story tells the story of a different Congressional Medal of Honor winner from history. This one is Andrew Paquette doing an incredible job on the art on the story of Wild Bill Donovan, the founder of the OSS, which became the CIA. but it's about his amazing exploits in World War I in France. And in addition to that as well, I am still writing the weekly Pellucidar comic strip for Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated, edgarriceburroughs.com, drawn by Gary Quapis. We're into our 7th year. We have not missed a week in 7 years. If you want to read a big, honking, huge Edgar Rice Burroughs based epic, go take a look at it. I think we have the longest continuous running strip on that site. And, you know, so I'm continuing to do that as well. I did some pages this month to stay ahead of Gary. And then also every once in a while, I'll go chip away at the next Levon Cade novel. This is the last Levon Cade novel. And then there's one after this called Levon's Hunt. I'm currently working on I believe it's the 10th Levon novel called Levon's Prey. So that's what I've done this month. And it seems like a lot, and I guess it is a lot, but none of it seems like work. It's more like a compulsion. The older I get, people talk about burnout and things like that. Is there such a thing as burn in? I mean, I keep wanting to do this. And come up with the ideas, I put them down, and I manage to stay ahead of my artists, well ahead of my artists in most cases. And it's what I've been doing now for 35 years, and I still dig it. How do I manage my time? I generally work actually sitting at the keyboard is maybe 6 hours a day. The rest of the time, of course, I'm in la la land. I'm thinking of the ideas. I'm putting stuff together. I wake up in the morning thinking about my next page. So, how do I keep all the storylines straight? I have no idea. I really don't. I just think my brain doesn't operate the way other people's do. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've certainly been able to make a career out of having my brain operating correctly. But yeah, I've never had a problem. And people go, well, how do you switch gears between, writing, Batman and writing The Simpsons? Well, I just do. I just do. You know, I have an understanding of the medium. I think that comics are a second language to me, so it's easy for me. Now, I'm not saying it's not work, because I do. I sweat it, because you don't want to you don't want to go at it like, oh, it's old hat and I know how to do this. I'm just going to do it the way I've always done it. I'm always challenging myself to approach it in a different way. Think of a different means. Is there a better way to say this? Is there a better way to present this? Because when you've written as many comics as I have, you're going to run into scenes that are similar. I mean, not the same exact scene, but you know, there's a chase, there's a fight, and you want to think, okay, I don't want to just do what I did before. I want to come up with something new. And that, to me, that's the challenge. But yeah, I don't know how I do it, except that I love it. So that makes it a whole lot easier. Okay, Devin Malcolm Robertson, since you expressed the desire to talk about it, I'll bite. Why is lettering important, and who are your favorite letterers? Well, yeah, I mentioned in an earlier video that lettering is important, probably far more important than a lot of people understand if you're not in the business or you didn't really ever think about it. Lettering is it's the best lettering is invisible. Okay, I think the best comic book writing is invisible. You shouldn't be thinking about the writing when you're reading a story. You should just think about the story. And the best lettering is invisible. It doesn't intrude on the artwork. It doesn't call attention to itself. And here, I'm not real sure. It's a DC comic. This could possibly be Gaspar Saladino, one of the great. Well, he's a legendary letterer. He's the guy who came up with the Superman logo that we all know and love. He's came up with most of DC's logos. It's just an incredible talent. And you want the lettering to just carry the story without intruding, like I said, or calling attention to itself. Because comics is a weird medium. You're reading and looking at pictures at the same time, and you want to make sure that lettering is basically part of the picture. But there's more to lettering than just putting words down. This is the best comparison I can think of. In the 50s, they invented a typewriter large enough that you could put a comic book page in it. And they came up with a font that mimicked comic book lettering. And it was called machine lettering. And here you see it, it's from a Charlton comic. Charlton used it all the time. Now, on the right, or on the left, I'm sorry, is how it would appear in the comic. And I don't know, some people can see it, some people can't. If you're a super uber comics nerd like me, you can see it. That lettering on the left, not only is it poorly spaced, or I think they use kerned, there's all kinds of terminology with comic book letters that even I don't understand. I've spent hours and hours in the company of comic book letters, hearing them talk to each other, hearing them hotly debate different aspects of lettering. But I don't, it's like they're talking mathematics, they're talking quantum physics. I can't understand any of it. But you can see the difference. You know, on the left, it's not spaced right. And what it is it's dead. It's dead. It's not part of the artwork. It's something different. It's a different animal. The best illustration I can think of is EC horror comics were machine lettered. And you look at it, it's perfectly serviceable lettering. It's easy to read. It's clear, but it's dead. Look at that Jack Davis artwork. You can see Jack's hand. You can't see the letterer's hand because it's machine done. Even the balloons, they just don't work. They don't seem alive. They just seem dead on the page. And as great as the EC comics were, and as professionally done as they were, this is the big drawback. And this is why when Harvey Kurtzman began his own books, he wanted hand lettering because he hated the machine lettering, and he wanted hand lettering that's part of the artwork. And look at this example. This is Ben Oda. Ben Oda, one of the greatest letterers ever. And here we see that it all looks integrated now. The lettering looks like part of the artwork. You can see the hand. You can see a human drew that balloon. A human did that lettering in ink with a pen. And it's all integrated. The lettering is now part of the artwork, even down to the sound effects. Look how the sound effect is integrated into that third panel there. And that's what letterers do. It's the mystery of letterers. And there's all different kinds of fonts. Everybody does lettering differently. Here we see, as I mentioned before, Gaspar Saladino, absolute master. John Costanza, probably my favorite letterer of all time, and the letterer that I most frequently got to work with at DC. He lettered, I think, every single issue of Detective Comics that I wrote. I liked Costanza's stuff. This isn't really an example of Costanza's lettering. He had his own font. Actually, his signature there is a better example of how he usually lettered things. But he had this real in-your-face He-Man, no-nonsense lettering style that I loved. He lettered all of the DC War comics that I love so much, and I wanted him. I always wanted to work with John. I always wanted to work with John. I would always request him whenever I got a chance. And then at the bottom we see Darwin Cook, who is not famous as a letterer, but Darwin Cook, like Larry Hama, a Renaissance man. He could do everything in comics, and he was no slouch at the lettering either. So, here we see some of Costanza's work on a war comic, and we see his sound effects. And look how his sound effects, they don't intrude on the art, they enhance the art. Now, in this case, Russ Heath, I know from working with Russ myself, those sound effects are probably suggested by Russ, not only suggested, but drawn onto the artwork in pencil. Because back in the day, back before computer lettering, the artist would hand in his penciled artwork. The letterer would letter it. It would be sent back to the artist to be inked, or sent to someone else to be inked. Now, what Russ would do is he would pencil in the sound effects, he would pencil in the captions and balloons, and he would even letter them in pencil to make sure that he had them right, that he had the proportions right, and he had them integrated into the artwork correctly. And then, of course, John Costanza would take that and use that as a guide, for how Russ saw the artwork. And that's another thing. That's a whole different art in itself, is balloon placement. Where to place the balloon. And some artists don't leave you enough room. Some artists don't understand. Some artists will switch characters from left to right, so you actually have to rewrite the comic book to make sure that the balloons go in the right order. And balloon placement, trust me, is an art unto itself. To make that balloon so it's uh, properly aligned, so you could follow along the dialogue in its natural order without any struggle. And this is Albert de Guzman, another terrific letterer who did a lot. I think he did almost all my Robin issues. Another terrific letterer. Um, and one of the greatest lessons I ever got in word balloon placement, I wish I had saved it, was I got to see Xerox copies of balloon placements corrected by Mike Carlin, the Superman editor, Mike Carlin. And they had some novice letterer came and was, placing balloon placements. And then Mike went in and wrote notes about why they got this wrong and where the balloon should have been and where the tail should be. And it was just it, it was like a crash course in balloon placement. And like I said, I wish I had saved it or gotten Xeroxes of it, because it was absolutely brilliant. And in the notes, in the writing down the side of the page, he would give his reasons why the balloon was better here than there, and they were all on the money. I mean, you know, Mike knew his job, knows his job, I should say. Mike knows his job. One of the greatest comic book editors of all time, who I never really got to work with. But you know, balloon placement's another thing that you just don't think about when you're reading a comic, and you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to think about it. Now, sound effects. Sound effects is a whole different kettle of fish than dialogue and captions. Um, how much sound effects do you want? How much sound effects is too much? Do you even need sound effects if the art is effective enough that you don't need it? Now, the only conversation I ever had with Steve Ditko in person was about sound effects, and I don't know why. I think he brought it up, and he brought up how much he hated them. He didn't think they were necessary. That if your artwork was evocative enough, you didn't need a sound effect to enhance it. And he talked about how he particularly hated the issues of Spider-Man where Stan would have these pages of wild sound effects, that he would insist on it. We're going to do this fight scene. It's in a 6-panel grid. And the big takeaway on this is these crazy sound effects, Batoop and Bach. One of the panels on this page even has the sound effect "foom." It made no sense. But Stan was leaning into, the pop art angle. In fact, for a while, Marvel Comics even had the word pop art on their covers, up there near the character logo up in the left-hand corner of the comic. And so Stan was looking at this like, he was, starting to get some attention from the college kids, and he wanted to encourage more of that. So he leaned hard into the pop art aspects of comics, the more kitschy aspects of comics, camp, if you will. And Ditko hated it because, look here, these sound effects really are not incorporated into the artwork. They are drawing attention to themselves in all the wrong ways. And, that's why Ditko himself hated it. I remember reading this comic as a kid and thinking it was stupid. But, I understand what Stan was going for. But it not a good idea. Now, manga, they really know how to incorporate a sound effect. They really do. Now, look at the sound effect. It's I don't even know what this is. I guess it's simplified Japanese characters. But I don't even have to know what the onomatopoeia of that sound effect is, because it looks so cool and it's so integrated into the artwork and it's so powerful. Um, And even when they translate them into English, it works. It's not overpowering. It's not really drawing attention to itself. It really is enhancing the artwork, even though it's somewhat overbearing. No, but it's not. It's not overbearing. It has a place there. It's not really drawing attention to itself. But I really like Japanese sound effects. The things they do with them, the way they'll stretch them and warp them around the artwork. It's brilliant. And there's a number of people that can do that in American comics as well. And if you look at European comics, sound effects are generally downplayed a little bit more. They're smaller. They're not as intrusive. They're not as large. But and I can't go by without mentioning, my buddy Tim Harkins, who was a letterer. He's one of my first letterers. He lettered Airboy, and he stuck with me through a lot of my DC run, editing tons of stuff. And he's another guy that I would ask for. I would ask for John Costanza or Tim Harkins. And Harkins lettered very much like Costanza. He followed Costanza's font for the most part, with very little variation. So that's more than you probably wanted to know about lettering. Of course, it's all done by computer now. So, but still follows the same rules and still looks as if it's done by hand because it's based on hand drawn or hand lettered fonts. So there you go. Hey, I mentioned Archaven and Arctoons. You can be a patron. You can be a part of it for $1, $3, $5. You can support Arctoons, which, yes, it's a free digital service, but there's stuff on the site that's not available to everybody. And if you're a member, you can see more. Also, you can help me out in financing the many, many projects that I'm producing for Arctoons, and that's always appreciated. Hey, everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and I'll see everybody down the road.